Right, today's topic is going to be volumetrics, and it's going to take approximately 40 minutes, and we're going to learn about V-Ray aerial perspective and V-Ray environment fog. So the outcome, you'll be able to set up properly those two effects. V-Ray environment fog, I'm going to check it out as a first element. The V-Ray environment fog allows us to simulate effects like fog, dust, smoke, or other tiny particles floating in the atmosphere. The effect can be confirmed within the boundaries of a gizmo or any geometry. We can control which light source contribute to the effect. V-Ray performs ray tracing, including GI, within fog, which creates physically accurate results with volumetric light and shadows. Textures can be used to control the fog, but ray tracing through the volume can be slow. Emissive component allows us to fake GI in the volume without having to calculate it. So here we see the general parameters. Fog color, the color attenuation of the fog. Fog distance controls the fog density. Larger values make the fog more transparent. Fog emission allows us to add self-illumination color to the fog to fake GI bouncing within it. Scatter GI. When enabled, global illumination will be calculated for the fog. This can quite slow, hence the suggest using the fog emission. Scatter bounces. When the scatter GI checkbox is enabled, the one on top, the parameter controls how many times a ray of light bounces within the fog. So this one will determine how much it will bounce. But again, it's warmly recommended not to use that because it's gonna slow down your render tremendously. Fog height puts a limit on how far the fog reaches along the z-axis. So we can control how tall it is regarding to our buildings. Step size. When we use texture to control fog parameters, V-Ray needs to sample the fog in steps starting from the camera and moving into the volume of the fog. This parameter determines the distance each ray travels before taking next step. Higher values are faster to calculate, but many miss some of the fine detail in the texture. So with the step size, we can reduce our rendering times, but we might lose some detail. Cutoff threshold. When V-Ray is tracing inside the volume, it accumulates information about the transparency. This parameter tells V-Ray when to stop. If transparency is below this level, any additional tracing will not have a visible effect, so V-Ray will stop the ray tracing. Maps, so you can see here we can load maps. Fog color, a texture slot to control the color attenuation of the fog. Density texture, a texture slot to control the density of the fog. The values in the texture are multiplied by the fog distance parameter to get the actual density. Fog emission, a texture slot to control self-illumination color of the fog. Ray filter. Here we can disconnect in order to speed up our render, so we can disconnect different effects of that fog and remove it from reflections. The option in the section allows us to speed up the rendering in the environment fog by disabling it from affecting certain calculations. Affect background. The background will not be obscured by the fog. Affect refractions. Specifies as whatever the fog will be visible in refractions or reflections. Affect shadows. When disabled, the fog will not generate volumetric shadows. Affect GI. When disabled, the fog will not affect the calculation of GI for the rest of the scene. Affect camera rays. When disabled, the fog will not be visible directly by the camera. And here we can add gizmos and lights in order to specify what we want to control. Gizmos is a list of gizmos or geometries within which V-Ray environment will be contained. So we can limit our V-Ray fog within gizmo, everything within the box, we can say just work in that area. Use all lights, this parameter right here. When enabled, all the lights will affect V-Ray environment fog. When disabled, only lights in the list below will affect the fog. So here we can click add and add certain lights that we want this fog to be affected. V-Ray aerial perspective is the next effect that we will check. It's a little bit simpler. V-Ray aerial perspective allows us to simulate the effect of looking at the objects at the distance throughout the atmosphere. The effect is similar to a thin haze, contributes to realism of a large-scale exterior scenes. The result of effect is very similar to effect of the V-Ray environment fog, but it is only an approximation, so it's not that accurate. The effect is much quicker to calculate than the V-Ray environment fog, but it's not entirely physically accurate. Volumetric shadows are not calculated. So those are the parameters here, only this. Visible range in meters specifies as the distance of which fog has absorbed 90% of the light coming from behind it. Lower values will make the fog look more dense. Atmosphere height in meters specifies as the height of the fog. In scattered light intensity, a multiplier for the brightness of the light is scattered within the fog. Filter color allows us to tint the color of the fog. Alright, so now let's get to our demonstration. Alright, so I'm going to open my Aerial Fog Simple and go to Environment. Let's add Aerial Perspective and click on the interactive render. Alright, so you can see that's a little bit too much. I'm going to cancel and let's increase this visibility range to 30,000. Alright, so now we start getting the effect. Now let's reduce the atmosphere height to about 500. Let's reduce it to about 50. Okay, so we can see the height very low, and increase light intensity is another one. So let's check this out. So we can see it adds a lot of thickness to the fog. Let's get it to 500. See how thick it is. Oh, too thick, very thick. So let's reduce our intensity to 0.5 in order to get the effect. Now let's play with color and see how this affects our render. Fog color. Pretty cool effects. Now let's check out the atmosphere. That's our pass. This is how it looks. We can use it in post-production in order to increase the volumetric fog effect if it's too low. Now let's unhide our sun here, and let's lower this to 0.1. Click render. Too low. 0.1. Yeah, so you can see how sun affects the fog. If it's much higher, you get way more volume in the sun. Now we have filter color also, and this is something that also can affect our fog. You can see we're getting kind of yellowish light, and that's works with combination with our fog. Now let's render. Alright, so pretty simple, not as complicated as V-Ray fog, but also very quick to calculate and can be used with conjunction with V-Ray environment fog in order to create something unique.